us leaders are afraid to hold people accountable. And something I've always believed in, and I think EOS does it really well, is just accountability through visibility. Just make things visible.
Well, hello and welcome to the Jay Sterling Hughes Show, where we share the straight truth on how we have grown our family law practice from 0 to 25 attorneys and doing over $15 million in revenue, and all that in the past 10 years. And my purpose here is to document what's working and what's not working, with hopes that you can take that and you can recontextualize that in your practice and shorten your success curve. And I have a guest today. My guest is our president, Jeff Kerlin. Not only is he our president, he's a dear friend of mine, and I'm excited to kind of unpack what is in his head regarding a law firm operating system. So let me give you some context on this, Jeff, and I'll turn it over to you as we kind of go through what's happening today at Sterling. But when Tony Carls and I started Sterling Law almost 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago this month in June of 24, we started the firm before we even launched on an operating system. And think of a firm operating system similar to what maybe you have on your phone with iOS for Apple or Android. For an Android phone, it's a way to manage the meetings, the cadence, the goal setting, all of that. It's a way to do that for a law firm. And we chose the Entrepreneurial Operating System that's described in a book by Gino Wickman called Traction. And day one, before we even launched the firm, Tony and I would sit in a room once a week and we would have our EOS meeting that we call an L10, stands for Level 10 meeting. And we followed it to a T, including to the point where we added and modified over the years. But if you look at our systems today, they're going to be very similar to what is prescribed in that book and the subsequent books that have come out describing the EOS model. So Jeff, today you oversee a team of about 70 teammates, all following EOS. So let's start from the beginning. How would you describe what we're doing and what the system does for our firm today?
Yeah, glad to. Thanks for having me, first of all. Yeah, like Jeff said, EOS in the book Traction is what we follow. And I was fortunate enough that I was running that at the previous company that I was at, so I was very familiar with it. But basically, the concept is to get everyone focused and executing on the right things, which sounds both easy and it's daunting at the same time. That involves making sure that everybody is on the same page, they have a shared vision, and that there's really accountability. We've all been in meetings in other firms and throughout our careers where you have really good meetings and everybody leaves there with their to-dos and I'm going to do this and whatnot, and a lot of passion and excitement. And then you come back 2 weeks later and hardly anything got done. And it's not because of anything malicious or that no one cared. People just get caught up in our day-to-day jobs and it's hard to stay focused. So EOS really keeps everybody together and in sync and accountable to what needs to get done to move the firm forward.
So you mentioned, Jeff, that you ran this at your last business that you managed, which was a fairly large printer here in our local area, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
And so we're talking printing. You printed labels for really high-end gear and ran a team of production folks on the line, back office, and so forth, all on EOS. So transferring that to a law firm, which is much different, obviously, than a printer, it still fits, right?
It does. That's one thing beautiful about it. I think it's applicable to any organization.
Describe what EOS is on a kind of a big 30,000 foot view. What are the major components of EOS? And then describe how you implement that here in our firm.
Well, it starts with a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal that the senior team comes up with. And that might be a 10-year where we'd love to be here sort of thing, which is fluffy and ambiguous and what have you. But more importantly, a 3-year plan. Like, what are we really going to look like? And what do we want to look like in 3 years? Financially, top line growth, people, what have you, maybe other service offerings, things like that. And it's a little bit ambiguous, and it's a little lofty and it should push you. The real meat gets into an annual goal where the senior team comes up with an annual goal that's going to move us towards that 3-year goal. And that involves annual planning. So we do that once a year. We come up with those goals. We share that with the whole company. Transparency again, and it holds us accountable. We're saying we're going to do this. Then that breaks down into quarterly goals and quarterly rocks, where you have quarterly, every 3 months you have planning, and you talk about the big things besides just our day-to-day work. What do we have to do to move us towards that goal, the annual goal? And that starts with the senior leadership team, and then that gets spread out to the rest of the firm, and each other teams, they come up with their quarterly rocks that need to complement and go along with the the overall company goals for the quarter. That breaks down further into weekly L10 meetings that Jeff, you referenced earlier. And L10 really, at the end of the meeting, everyone gets to rate the meeting and the goal is to rate it a 10. But if it's not a 10, talk about why wasn't it a 10? I felt like we went off on tangents here and there. I'm giving it an 8. Okay, that's really great advice and commentary for the leader of the meeting. But those are weekly. They're pretty fast. It involves a little bit of camaraderie and team building. What went right this week to getting into the meat of the meeting is the IDS. It's identify, discuss, and solve. And that's where most of the time is spent. And that's, okay, we've got these issues. Let's talk about them. Let's try and solve them. If we can't solve them in this meeting, and maybe a couple of people leave with a to-do, and that like, hey, I'm going to check into this. I'm going to run these reports. I'm going to come back next week with this information until you can solve it. And those to-dos are kept track of. They're communicated via email, and there's a high accountability. And sometimes you don't get those to-dos done the next week, but you should get them done eventually because they're going to stay open until that person gets them done. And then you can send things from one meeting to another. Like say, we want to send this to the operations team, or we want to send this to the finance team to get answers back to us. And it's really easy to communicate. And again, just keep things very visible and accountable. That breaks down even further for us, where we do daily huddles. Most of our teams meet for sometimes just 10 or 15 minutes in the morning. It's a quick, hey, let's go over our metrics for the day. How are we doing? Sterling, we measure, we have our target, our goal, where we want to be on all our core metrics for each area. And then how are we doing compared to those for 6-month average, 28-day average, and then 5-day average. And you can tell pretty quickly looking at those, hey, are we trending in the right direction or not? We have them turn green if we're in the green and red if they're not. And then that should trigger action. Okay, we've been in the red for a little bit. What are we going to do about that? Mm-hmm. So that's real quick overview of what we do.
So you start from 3 years, and that's kind of a lofty, this is our aspiration of where we want the firm in 3 years. And that's fully descriptive of all the financial metrics, performance metrics, cultural ideals and norms and initiatives and all that is in that description, right? Yeah. And it breaks down to a year, which is theoretically a third of that 3-year plan. Mm-hmm. The things that we need to do over the next year to push us toward that 3-year plan. And then it goes down to a quarter, then down to the week. And then you mentioned huddles as well. So this sounds like a ton of meetings. So let's kind of break down the meeting. So is everyone in the company in a huddle on a daily basis today?
I wouldn't say everyone. I would say probably about 50% of the folks are in huddles every day.
So folks on the front line, teammates on the front line, they tend not to be in daily huddles as much. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Well, although our intake and sales team, they are on daily huddles, but they're very quick. They're communicating new changes. They may do some quick role playing in them, outline something that, hey, we got to be aware of this today. It's very, very tactical. It's not strategic. It's just reacting to what do we have today? Do we have any roadblocks today that we need to address?
Now, lawyers are really busy, and I know that we've got pushback, and rightfully so in many cases in the past. Are all the lawyers today in a huddle?
They are generally not in huddles. They are in weekly L10 meetings. Okay. But all of our lawyers work with their paralegals, and they do workflow meetings once a week as well, where they touch on every single client. Where is this case at? What do we have to do to move it forward? Yeah. And they leave those what to do. So they have a different version because they're obviously client facing.
And our senior partners, those that are in leadership roles and above, those teammates are in huddles on a daily basis most of the time.
They are, yes. Yeah, okay. We have a management team huddle every morning that they are all invited to.
Okay, and then describe how the quarter by quarter goal setting works, or rock setting works, as it pushes us toward that 1 year outcome that we're striving for.
Yeah, we start with the finances, like how are we doing financially? And our CFO will share with us on how are we doing, how are we tracking, which we're usually pretty aware of that. He might get into a little more detail. And what do we need to do the following quarter to keep us moving towards our financial goals? But then we obviously have other goals. It could be systematic goals. It could be all sorts of things. We get ideas from the level 10 meetings that we may say, this is something we're not going to tackle on a weekly basis. This is something that's bigger, it's much more meaty, and we need to tackle this on a quarterly basis. So that would be teed up to be reviewed as a potential quarterly rock. But then also every quarter we have an advisory team where we take folks from all throughout our legal team, and we get together and we meet for about just an hour, and we have them come prepared with what's working, what's not working, and what are things we should be considering from their point of view. And we bring those to the leadership team quarterly planning, and we review those as well. And in many cases, at least one or two of those end up being rocks.
Yeah. So a rock would be a goal that's a quarter in length, 90 days roughly to complete the rock.
Yep.
So it could be a section or a subsection of a much bigger goal.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. So these advisory teams would meet and give our listeners an example of what would be a topic that team would be kind of like a committee, right? That you'd find in another company where they would meet together to talk about a particular topic. What would be an example of one of those?
Yeah. I mean, to be real candid, for a while there, this was probably 3 quarters ago, maybe a year ago, there was this feeling of a bit of disconnect between the legal teams and corporate, and that especially bothered me. And I was so proud of the team for sharing that. Like, we just feel a little bit disconnected. We're growing rapidly. We don't feel like we're as joined together. So we had them like, okay, what are some things we could do to, we're primarily virtual, but how can we do things to drive more collaboration between the two and feel like corporate versus legal? And we came up with a lot of good ideas around that and ended up being some corporate rocks.
Okay. So those ideas would then be distilled down to the best ones to pursue. Those that show up on a rock. Describe what maybe some rocks would be for us this quarter that we're currently in, that we're just started or concluding. I don't know where your cadence is today.
One big rock is we are creating a virtual legal assistant role. And this is someone that's entirely virtual. And we want them to be able to help out our legal teams and from a virtual standpoint. And these are folks for us that's over in the Philippines, our Filipino teammates. And this is an opportunity for our Filipino teammates to elevate. We want to have career mapping for them, just like everybody else. And we've been developing this role. This has been going on for 2 quarters. We've got it fully executed in one of our regions. This next quarter, we want to have it executed in all 4 of our regions. So that's like the big rock for this quarter for that particular goal. And it started at the beginning of the year. Like by the end of this year, we want to have this virtual legal assistant role fully mapped out with a job description and everything that goes with any other role. So it started off that way, but like you said, we break it down into quarterly chunks. And by the end of the year, we plan to have this fully implemented throughout the whole firm.
And are we using a software to help track this so everyone can stay on the same page and see the same thing? Yeah,
it used to be called Traction Tools. Now it's called Bloom. Bloom, and it works very well. It ties everything together. Mm-hmm. It's fairly robust.
So when the team would get together, for example, for a weekly level 10 meeting, and ours are mostly held on Thursdays for our lawyers in particular, right? So they'll get together and they can open it up on their laptop wherever they're at, because they're most of the time not in the same room physically, right? So they're at court or wherever they're at, they're coming into the meeting. They can see the agenda. And they can see the issues that need to be solved, and they can vote for what issues to tackle and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And that software. Exactly. Cool. All right. So describe what's on that agenda. Just give a flavor for how what is actually addressed step by step in that 1 hour meeting.
Yeah, we spend a few minutes just on a positive focus. Start the meeting off in a positive manner. What's some positive focus? It depends on the size of the team, but at leadership level, we try to each share something. Maybe it's professional and personal, something from the last week. It could be, hey, my kid got their braces off this week. That's awesome. I keep that fun. It really just starts the meeting off on a good note. It goes into celebrating some successes. What are some people highlights from this last week? Hey, this paralegal went above and beyond for this client. They met them on a Saturday, what have you. And I just want to call them out. And those are things actually that we take those and we share those with the whole firm in our biweekly summons meetings. It then moves into, okay, what are some of the previous to-dos that we had? How are we doing on those? How people can go in there and literally check, yep, I got that done. No, I didn't get that one done. I'm still waiting on XYZ. To what are our rocks? What is the status of our rocks? We go over our rocks. Where are we at on them? Are we on track to having these completed in time? Are we not on track? If we're off track, that should trigger a to-do. And if we are on track, great, it's green. And then it goes into the meat of the meeting. So that all goes very quickly, probably 10 minutes, what I just described, max. The meat of the meeting is the IDS portion. That again is identify, discuss, and solve. So then any issues that have been maybe passed on from one meeting to this meeting, or issues that we went throughout the week, we put in there going, hey, this is an issue that we pulled out of the huddle. We want to discuss in a level 10 meeting. We then vote on, okay, what do we want to talk about first? And we pick 3 issues, work through those 3 issues. Then we pick 3 more issues, pretty much until you run out of time or you ran out of issues.
So when you find something that is better for another team to address, how do you transfer that issue for that other team to solve or look at?
Yeah, it's very simple. There's just a little forward button and you forward it, and then you'll get the whole list of all the other L10 meetings, and we have a lot of different meetings. You just pick the one and it'll pop and show up right in their L10. And the same thing happens in your meeting. You'll have things forwarded to your meeting, and then here's the issue, here's what we're hoping you guys can provide us input on, and then we may send it back. Here's the answer to it, and we're sending it back.
Cool. So is there anything about the system that we use today that you find is problematic, doesn't work as well?
No, honestly, I think it works really well. At the end of the meeting, you get a synopsis on what all got solved, who has what to-dos, so everybody knows what they have to do and when they have to have it done by. I think it's actually really good.
Well, cool. Anything that I've overlooked that you wanted to share?
No, other than accountability is often a dirty word. Like, and us leaders are afraid to hold people accountable. And something I've always believed in, and I think EOS does it really well, is just accountability through visibility. Just make things visible. You don't have to rub people's noses and things. If someone's tied to a metric and they see that it's red, they're going to take it to heart, and they're not going to want it to be read in front of their teammates. And the team then rallies around that person and helps them with that metric. So it's just making everything transparent and very visible, and that just causes accountability just by having an awareness and visibility to it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to dispel a myth that I've heard sometimes where people will say that, well, my firm's too small. I don't need to have an operating system. We just communicate and it works out really well. And that may tide you over, but from day one, before we even had a client, we had an operating system for our firm, and it has kept us organized from the very get-go. And I think any firm with 2 or more people needs to be operating off an operating system of some sort, whether it be EOS, which is what we use, but there are other good ones out there. I know there's a system by Pinnacle. There's one by the Gazelles, or maybe it's the Rockefeller Habits or something like that is described there. They've got some. There are quite a few of them out there. So find an operating system for your firm. It's going to pay dividends. It's going to get you organized and gives everyone a voice. And it's just a great tool to use. So thanks, Jeff, for coming on. Appreciate it. Look forward to next time.
Sounds good. Thank you.